Yellow guys. So I've been reading this book. So a few months back, this author William Dalrymple, he was giving interviews left and right on every Indian channel, and I wanted to buy the book because I'm always I'm interested in ancient history, and I've been reading this. It's an interesting book. I've just started maybe 20 pages, I guess I would have read. And he talks about the naked Indian sages of ancient India that Alexander, the Greeks basically encountered when they, came to India. It's a very interesting thing to read, like to know about these naked philosophers that lived and I found this video a few days back, and this channel, I think, is Stephen. So I've watched two three videos in this channel, and it's really good. And yeah, let's go through this video. He talks about some interesting things, and I'll give my comments.
Alexander the Great meeting the naked sages of India. When Alexander the Great fought his way into India, he encountered King Porus, who had an army of elephants that smashed through the Greek infantry. But Alexander didn't just come for conquest. He also had an insatiable appetite for science, and therefore brought a complete scientific staff to study Indian nature and culture. Most intriguing were his encounter with what the Greeks called the gymnosophists, literally the naked sages of India, who spent their day motion.
Okay, so they are not completely naked, I guess. So they wear something called a komanam in Tamil. Just a loincloth, I guess.
In various postures on large rocks so hot that the Macedonians couldn't stand on them without shoes. Asking for their wisdom,
India is hot.
one of the sages responded that no one wearing the elaborate clothing of the Macedonians could be taught philosophy. The same sage,
That would have been the world's first Indian roast.
however, later decided to join Alexander on his travels. But while in Persia, he placed himself on a funeral pyre, had it lit, and then sat motionless as the flames consumed him. One Greek philosopher got so inspired by the story that during
So that the story about Calamus or something like that. There's an Indian, one of the nude sages. His story is really intriguing and interesting. I hope somebody makes a movie about him. We'll get to know about him in a short.
during the Olympic Games, he read his own funeral oration and then also burned himself alive. So we have a lot to get to. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stefan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History
So this guy has written a lot of books, it seems.
channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself.
Oh, baby, a new one. 2 new listings of the exact same house. Wait. False alarm. It's just double vision.
That's a false alarm to you?
Never miss a new listing with property alerts. Download the Domain app.
At Valia, we know a healthy gut means a happy you. So boost your gut health and immunity with Valia's deliciously creamy yogurt, made with billions of probiotics. Valia, get gut happy. Squeeze the day with our new Valia Boost yogurts.
Let's start. After Alexander the Great's victory over the Persians, he set out to reach what he believed to be the end of the world, which the Greeks of the time believed to be India. When he entered India in 326,
That's interesting. So they had no idea about the existence of China then at that time? What? It can't be the case.
BC, he was welcomed without resistance by a small kingdom of India centered around the city Taxila, an Indian center of learning. The next king, however, Porus, was prepared to fight, resulting in Alexander's last major battle, fought in the drenching rain along the river Hydaspes. Porus had an army of not only infantry,
And I guess that must have been their first encounter with elephants. So elephants are native to India, I believe. I could be wrong. So there's African elephants as well, I think, but I'm not sure if Alexander. I don't know, was aware of it, or if he had seen it. I don't know about that.
cavalry, and chariots, but also elephants. And it was the first time that the Greeks encountered them on the battlefield. Each elephant had on top a rider and some soldiers with bows and javelins. And these elephants were used to crush through the Greek infantry. The Greeks then shot at the riders and wounded the elephants at the knees. Alexander eventually won, after which he restored Porus as king, who would remain his loyal ally until his death. Alexander had thought that
Was this the map? Indus.
King Porus would be the last enemy on the edge of the world. But he soon found out that he had only discovered the first part of a much larger Indian subcontinent. This was a great disappointment to Alexander and also to his men, who hoped to be able to finally go home after 8 years of war. Alexander then tried to convince his men to continue, but they started to openly protest. Alexander was deeply disappointed, but eventually he gave in to the wishes of his men. At the furthest distance he had reached, he then erected 12 altars, or according to other sources, 12 statues of gods. But unfortunately, these were never found. Throughout his life, Alexander had a deep interest in nature and culture, which he unfortunately, these
12 statues of gods. It's not mentioned where.
were never found. Throughout his life, Alexander had a deep interest in nature and culture, which he shared with his teacher, the great philosopher Aristotle. Pliny wrote about him, King Alexander the Great, being fired with a desire to know the natures of animals, and having delegated the pursuit of this study to Aristotle, as a man of supreme eminence in every branch of science, orders were given to some thousands of persons throughout the whole of Asia and Greece, all those who made their living by hunting, fowling and fishing, and those who were in charge of warrens, herds, apiaries, fish ponds and aviaries, to obey his instructions so that he might not fail to be informed about any creature born anywhere. And in Athenaeus, we read that Alexander called History of Animals. Aristotle is often seen as the in ancient times, a letter tells a similar story. Here, Alexander helps supply his teacher Aristotle with information as he journeys through India. He writes, "Since I know that you are interested in philosophy, I thought I would write to you about the parts of India and the kinds of serpents, men and beasts that are to be found there. Whenever a man learns something about a new subject, it increases his learning and his understanding. Alexander also took a considerable scientific staff with him to India. There were historians who recorded his deeds, and philosophers who investigated the surroundings. These philosophers included Callisthenes, Anaxarchus, and also his student Pyrrho, who is the famous founder of skepticism.
Oh, I had no idea about that. Pyrrho found skepticism, huh?
The generals Ptolemy and Nearchus also wrote significant works on their journey through India, as did the navigator and cynic philosopher Onesicritus, and also the architect Aristobulus. Important for today's lecture was Alexander's stay at Taxila and his meetup with the gymnosophists, or the naked philosophers.
Okay.
We read in Strabo that on arrival in Taxila, Alexander was intrigued by a group of naked ascetics he observed in a grove outside the city, and who were practicing various yoga postures. He then sent Onesicritus to interview.
And if you notice in the paintings, there's color differentiation. Some are dark skinned and some are relatively fair skinned, right? If you notice, these ones are like the more dark skin. These ones are like, so they didn't have to make that distinction unless it was noticeable.
Them. We read, Onesicritus found 15 men at a distance of 20 states or 4 kilometers from the city, who were in different postures, standing or sitting or lying, naked and motionless till evening. A yogi named Calanus, age 72.
So this yogi is just remember his name. He's an important yogi.
Was lying on stones when he first saw him. The stones, we then read, were so hot that none of the Macedonian soldiers could step on them without shoes. Onesicritus approached them politely and inquired about their beliefs. Calanus responded dismissively, claiming that no one wearing the elaborate clothing of the Macedonians could be taught philosophy. They should instead be naked, they said, and learn to sit peacefully on a broiling rock. We read, Calanus bade them, if he wished to learn, to take off his clothes and to lie down naked on the same stones. And as we will later learn, Calanus was an extreme ascetic, practicing mortification of the body, or, quote, seeking pain.
That is interesting. Seeking pain, huh? Now, I was under the impression that maybe he was beyond pain. That's just a perspective, I guess.
But then another mild.
Okay, so here they look really naked after all.
Older philosopher, Mondanus, also called Dandanus, who was called, quote, the oldest and wisest of the philosophers, rebuked Calanus as a man of arrogance.
When your heart yearns for the open road, get the insurance you deserve. Comprehensive cover with 3-year new car replacement.
This is Anaconda's 4-wheel drive bucket list, and it's one adventure you just can't miss. Tough tracks and epic scenery. Watch the full episode now.
And then he told him that he should be Calanus as a man.
And in this painting, the sages look really fair-skinned, right? What about that?
Man of arrogance. And then he told him that he should be more accommodating to a king, namely Alexander, who wished to learn wisdom. He then expressed admiration for Alexander as a, quote, philosopher in arms, and then apologized for the fact that because of the language barrier, despite having 3 interpreters around, the chance of his message being fully understood would be, quote, like expecting water to flow pure through mud. All that Onesicritus managed to understand was that, quote, the best teaching is that which removes pleasure and pain from the soul. The text continues,
That is profound. Removes pleasure and pain from the soul. Wow.
man trains the body for toil in order that his opinion may be strengthened, whereby he may put a stop to conflicts and be ready to give good advice to all. Mandanus then also advised Taxiles, the king of Taxila, to receive Alexander. In another source, Arrian, we read that Mandana also said that he needed little material goods, that he lived only on what the earth offered freely, and he expressed the opinion that Alexander's adventures were pointless. Mandanus was also a vegetarian of an extreme kind, eating only fruit, which was common among the Jains. He also spoke of
So there's a bit of a debate, I think, whether these naked sages were Jains or Ajivikas or Buddhists or what. But I think I just did a ChatGPT search, and ChatGPT says it could have been mostly Jains, but the Greeks also could have clubbed all of these naked sages together and then referred to them in a generic kind of way, right? But based on whatever you see, the extreme asceticism and nudity, and based on all of that, they say it could have been Jains.
of death as a release from the body, and he then asked Onesicritus whether such doctrines were also taught among the Greeks. Onesicritus responded, Pythagoras taught such doctrines, and also bade people to abstain from meat, as did also Socrates and Diogenes, and that he himself had been a pupil of Diogenes, referring to Diogenes the Cynic, the founder of the Cynic school of philosophy.
The other one was skepticism and the cynicism, right? What's the difference between skepticism, cynicism? So cynicism is origin, Piro, and focus knowledge and truth, virtue and lifestyle. Alright. Doubt and suspension of belief, rejection of convention and hypocrisy. Peace of mind through non-assertion, freedom through simplicity and honesty. Doubt without evidence, distress of motives. Okay.
Mandanus finally concluded that the Greeks were, quote, sound-minded in general, but wrong in one respect, in that they prefer custom to nature. For otherwise they would not be ashamed to go naked, like himself, and to live on plain food, he said. A very interesting exchange. And then there is the Alexander Romance, written at latest in the 3rd century AD, which also gives a version of the encounter with the gymnosophists. The book has some fantastical elements. It is partly fictional, but it also used some legit sources, so it is still used by historians of Alexander the Great.
And I owe it all to you.
AI you'll love to use. Monday.com.
I choose Zimmel for how it makes me feel, and I feel great. It's lactose-free, easy to digest, so I can feel my best all day. And it tastes amazing. Zimmel. Real milk, great taste, easy to digest.
In this version, Alexander himself meets the naked philosophers in the forest. In this text, Montanus also talked about a life without possessions, and also that diet of fruit. But then he asked Alexander for immortality, to which Alexander answered that it was not his to give. But it turned out to be a trick question. He responded, "Since you are mortal, why do you make so many wars? When you have seized everything, where will you take it? Surely you will only have to leave it behind for others." So he claimed that Alexander's actions would only
That's a very common thing that is said in India.
make sense if he was immortal, which he was not. Alexander was moved by the response, we read, but responded that his life of conquest was ordained by providence, and that action is as necessary to the world as quietism. He ended his exchange by offering Damdanus gifts of gold, bread, wine, and olive oil. But Damdanus laughed and rejected most gifts, but he accepted the oil. But instead of anointing himself with it, as the yogis sometimes did, he poured the liquid into a fire, likely showing the worthlessness of possessions. Now back to our main sources. After the encounter with Onesicritus, Calanus, the first gymnosophist, proved willing to visit Alexander himself. The rest of the ascetics disapproved of this, claiming that he got seduced by the pleasures of Alexander's table. But Calanus went anyway. He then impressed Alexander with a parable. He threw a dry ox hide on the floor and
What is an oxide? Ah, okay. I see.
showed that if he pressed down on an edge of it, the other edge would rise up. The only way to make the hide stay flat was to stand in the center, and so too Alexander should maintain the center of his empire to keep the edges under control. Calanus then even decided to join Alexander's retinue, and he even returned with his army to Persia in 324 BC. But once they arrived in Pasargadae, a city very close to Persepolis, the capital of Persia, Calanus got a stomach problem, which led him to an extreme act. Believing sickness to be a disgrace, he sought to die by fire and then requested that Alexander build him a pyre. At first, Alexander tried to dissuade him from his plan, but when he was unsuccessful, he agreed to do what was asked. The pyre was erected, and everybody came to see the remarkable sight. True to his own creed, Calanus cheerfully mounted the pyre and perished, consumed along with it. Some of those who were present thought him mad, others vainglorious about his abilities to bear pain, while others simply marveled at his fortitude and his contempt for death. He climbed the pyre and lay down with decorum in the sight of the whole army when the fire was lit by those detailed for the task. The trumpets, says General Nearchus, sounded, as Alexander had ordered, and the whole army raised the shout they would raise when entering battle, and the elephants trumpeted their shrill war cry in honor of Calanus. Calanus bade farewell to Alexander, remarking that they would meet again in Babylon, and he remained motionless as the flames consumed him. What an incredible story. The news of Calanus' suicide eventually reached Taxila, and Megasthenes, a Greek who would later become a
That's why I think like maybe he was beyond pain. You know what I mean?
diplomat at the Indian court of King Chandragupta, also comments about it. We read that the other philosophers disapproved of his act, and Megasthenes writes about this. Megasthenes says that suicide is not a dogma among these philosophers, and that those who commit suicide are adjudged guilty of youthful impulsiveness. So there were clearly differences of opinions between these philosophers. Onesicritus then also added that the wives of some Indian communities also burned themselves alongside their deceased husband, a practice called sati. And we also read a similar ritual took place after the death of the Macedonian general Cetheus, who had married 2 Indian wives. When he died in battle in 317 BC, his wives vied for the honor of being burned alive along with him. The younger wife claimed that the elder one was pregnant and therefore could not be burned, while the elder one demanded that she had the right to be burned, being the senior wife. Midwives then determined that the elder was indeed pregnant, on which she, quote, departed weeping, tearing the wreath on her head and her hair. And the younger wife then rejoiced and mounted the pyre, dressed as if for a wedding, with ribbons in her hair.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So Sati was there, like, even during the Alexander's time. It was okay.
Then the army marched 3 times round the pyre, and then she submitted herself calmly to the flames. And again the onlookers were both shocked and moved by the ritual.
Again, these things are like could easily be made as movies. You know what I mean? Like, this is such fascinating.
Highpages is the #1 place to grow your tradie business.
And you're my #1 favourite mailbox.
Please, I saw you checking out number 39.
Hey, that was strictly business.
Start with Highpages.
A few centuries later, around 19 BC, we read that an Indian sage named Zarmanokegas came all the way to Athens.
Zarmanokegas.
And Zarmano, by the way, is likely the Greek version of Sramana or ascetic. And this man also burned himself to death. According to Plutarch, he was then buried in the Karamikos cemetery of Athens, in a tomb that still existed in Plutarch's day. And we read that the tomb read Zarmanokegas, an Indian.
Sarmano is Sramana. What is Kegas? Sages?
A native of Bargosa, having immortalized himself according to the custom of his country, here lies. And this was then repeated by the Greek Cynic philosopher Panagrinus Proteus, who wanted a spectacular ending to his life. He read his own funeral oration and then burned himself on a funeral pyre at the Olympic Games of 165 AD. What a story.
It is. As sad as it is. So they were trying to imitate the Indian naked yogis, huh?
Now on with our main narrative. Various scholars have wondered what religion these naked sages belonged to. The fruit diet and nudity reminds us of the Jains, while nudity, the deliberate seeking of pain, and suicide by fire, points to the Ajivikas. The naked sages were not likely Buddhists, as the Buddhists opposed self-mortification and suicide.
I think Buddhism is more like a middle path. So it doesn't deal with extremes, neither this extreme nor that extreme. It takes like a moderate kind of a path. So definitely not, may not have been Buddhist.
Suicide, and they're also not associated with nudity. General Nearchus in his work also distinguished the gymnosophists, or the naked sages, with the Brahmanes, or the Brahmins, who, quote, engage in affairs of state and attend the kings as counselors.
So
And he says that the gymnosophists, quote, also investigate natural phenomena, and that Calenus is one of these, and that their wives join them in the study of philosophy, and that the modes of life are all very severe. Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador at the Indian court, agreed with this, making a similar distinction between the Brahmins and what he called the Sarmanes, likely also derived from Shramana, meaning ascetic. The Brahmins, according to Megasthenes, are brought up from birth by learned men and were prominent at the royal court of Chandragupta, where Megasthenes worked. And later in life, he said, they dwell in groves on rushes and deerskins. They forego meat and sexual relations for a period of 37 years, and then retire to their own property, after which they do eat meat, but not spicy food, have many wives, and devote themselves to preparation for death.
That is fascinating, isn't it? Wow.
He then says that the most honored among the Sarmanes, that is the naked sages, are the Hylobioi, or the forest dwellers, who abstain from sex and wine and live on fruits and leaves. Clement, quoting Megasthenes, also speaks of these Hylobioi, who he says are homeless and live outside the cities, who do not marry and clothe themselves with the barks of trees, and subsist on acorns and water. And he then adds, quote, that among the Indians are also the philosophers who follow the precepts of Bauta, whom they honor as a god on account of his extraordinary sanctity, and this is the first reference to the Buddha in the West. And he then says, and the Semnoi, meaning holy among the Indians, go naked their whole lives long. They cultivate truth, make predictions about the future, and pay reference to a certain pyramid under which they consider the bones of a certain god to lie. And these pyramids here seem to refer to Buddhist stupas. Yet nudity, as mentioned before, is not a characteristic of the Buddhists. But overall, it seems Megasthenes, who lived at the court of Chandragupta, was aware of Buddhism, while the historians who joined Alexander around Taxila were not. Megasthenes also tells us about the gods of the Indians, but his description is not very helpful. As was common among the Greeks, he very
So I think like, so whatever we watched so far, based on that, it could have been either the Jains or the Ajivikas, right? And isn't it fascinating, like that? I believe even now there is some maybe in Ayodhya or somewhere close to that. You have these. I forgot the name of. So these. This is this Tamil movie Naan Kadavul that it was made centered around that. So the yogi Aghoris, right? The Aghoris. I'm not sure if they are you can't call them naked. Like are the Aghoris naked? I don't know. I'll have to. Okay, let's ask ChatGPT. Are the Aghoris naked philosophers? Okay, Aghoris are Shaivas with Kapalika Tantric traditions. They revere Shiva in his Agora. For radical aesthetic practices meant to transcend dualities like pure, impure, sacred, profane. Meditation and cremation grounds, use of human skulls as bowls. Rituals involving substances normally considered impure, sometimes, though not always, nudity or minimal clothing. This philosophy seeks to realize non-duality, the idea that everything is one and nothing is inherently pure or impure. The apparent transgressions are intended to destroy social and mental conditioning. Okay. Greek term gymnosophists literally means naked wise men. Greek and later Roman writers, Strabo, Arian, and Plutarch used it for Indian ascetics they encountered Heard of during, okay. These were Shramana type renunciants, likely Jains, Ajivikas, or early Buddhists, not Shaiva tantrics. They were naked not for look value or ritual transmission, but as an expression of complete renunciation of possessions and ego, a form of spiritual purity. Okay. So there's some similarity, I believe. So liberation through detachment. So the closest thing that we have in the present day to these naked ancient wise men are the Aghoris. And yeah, this is such a fascinating thing. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys in another video.